Mark Gober, welcome back to the Brain Supreme podcast. And I think this is the first podcast I've ever seen where you're not wearing a blazer.
Yeah, well, we're in Austin and it's really hot in August. I changed it up today.
I picked them up on the way here. And I was like, oh, you're not wearing a blazer. Yeah, I guess 100 degrees. What's the temperature cutoff? We're like, I can't do it. I guess I should say if it's not situation necessity. So if it's a day where you could go either way with the blazer, have you reached like a temperature point where you're not going to do it?
No, just today I was feeling no blazer.
Okay, good. I figured 95 degrees is kind of good, no blazer territory. All right, so look, I had such a good response from the first one. I'll bring you back. I want to push into viruses. I guess the two of the most, well, everything's important. Consciousness and all the work you've done is very important. But I would say that, the topic of viruses is so amazing. Like when you think about the formation of allopathic medicine, the evolution of allopathic medicine, the whole pharmaceutical industry, this is what it's based upon. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I want you to explain toxicology that existed before virology and informed, so medicine before the Rockefeller-Rothschild model, as I understand, so pre-1915, was a combination of allopathic and naturopathic medical doctors who had to go to school, but they also learned to use the plants and native trees and species of their environments. To post-1920 is a purely allopathic model. The original model was kind of based on toxicology, that things in the environment would get you sick, and then the model changed to virology. So let's go back in history. If you have this in your realm of expertise, I imagine you do. Let's break down toxicology versus virology, and then how that shift happened into kind of the new paradigm that we've been in since some point in the 1920s.
Well, another way to think about it is a holistic approach versus a germ-based approach.
Yeah.
Some call it germ theory versus terrain theory.
Yeah.
And the germ theory of disease is so obvious that most people don't even realize it's a theory, which is that there are microbes that exist that make us sick.
Yes.
And a lot of this discussion today will be about challenging that.
Yes.
Which is, I know if your audience hasn't heard that before, it sounds crazy, and it sounded crazy to me too. But you're also referring to some major changes that happened in the early 1900s with regard to medicine. There was a report publicly available. It's called the Flexner Report, and it was sponsored by the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefellers. And it talked about this shift, moving toward the allopathic model and away from things like homeopathy and more holistic ways of approaching health. The allopathic model, as I describe it in the book, is based on reductionism, meaning that it likes to find a single cause for a disease, something physical typically, where a germ fits in very well with that, because then we can point to that one thing and say, that's the enemy, we just need a pill, and that's going to kill it.
Yeah.
So it's reductionistic, and it also likes to focus on getting rid of symptoms rather than getting to the root cause of why there's a disease.
Right.
So if someone comes in with a symptom, they say, okay, take a pill, here's a Band-Aid, but it doesn't necessarily explain why the disease was there. And the germ theory model fits into this, like I said, because a germ you can point to.
Yes.
And just try to get rid of that and not necessarily think about, well, why was the germ even there in the first place?
Right.
Whereas the terrain model is what's going on in the person's body and even mind more broadly in terms of toxicity. It could be poisons, it could be EMFs, things like that. But I also like to incorporate psycho-spiritual aspects to terrain as well. Meaning what's going on in the person's psyche. Are they stressed out a lot? And then if we get into really spiritual topics, are there mystical things that could be affecting the terrain?
Right.
And this notion of terrain, it's sort of like if you're growing plants, you'd want to make sure the soil is in good shape and then the plant will grow well.
Right.
It's sort of like taking care of the body and then the body will be healthy, the terrain of the body and the mind, versus just pointing to these individual germs that would make people sick.
And when did, what year again was the Flexner Report? 1910. Okay. Because previous to that, doctors were kind of approaching this more holistically, integratively, as you said, but they also I remember specifically reading about toxicology versus virology. Like they would usually think that something in your environment was making you sick or making you toxic.
Well, something that people looked at more often, but even back in the 1900s, there was this notion of germ theory. So Louis Pasteur, who's famous for having pushed germ theory in the 1800s, he was studying rabies and he saw symptoms. No one denies that there are symptoms, but he couldn't figure out why there were symptoms. So he said, there must be something there that we can't see.
Right.
So there was this idea very often that there was a poison. And the word virus actually comes from the Greek word eos, which means a poison. So for a long time, there was a belief that there was some poison or some transmissible thing. It wasn't until the 1950s that the notion of a replication-competent intracellular parasite, which is what a virus is now, that came to be in the 1950s.
Okay. And then, so just give us what is so the issue is the solutions that viruses, okay, break down the testing of a virus, the solution that viruses are placed into. Because as I understand it, and this is what I want you to dig down into, the single aspect of a virus has never been identified outside of the kind of concoction that they put together to encapsulate the supposed virus and test the supposed virus. So I was trying to explain that to my son, who's having this debate with some of his friends about this. And because they went on ChatGPT or something, like, no, have been identified, which is true, but not entirely true.
Yeah.
So kind of break down that whole process.
So Dr. Tom Cowan, who was a mainstream medical doctor, and now he's changed his views on a lot of things, he asked this very basic question. How do you know that a virus exists and causes disease? Really simple question. I've asked a lot of people this question. Right. And the answer is typically things like, well, the scientists said so, or they did research and they proved it. So most people are not aware of the research that's done. Yes. And other people will say things like, well, there's a PCR test or some antigen antibody test, and that proves that there's a virus. But always we're dealing with something that's associated with the virus. It's an indirect test, not actually showing that the virus exists itself. So what you're getting at, Adam, is what's the origin of even knowing that viruses are real?
Right.
And I also want to preface this by saying, this discussion is not denying that people get sick. Yeah. People get sick and they can die from symptoms. The question is it because of this little parasite that gets inside of our cells and it starts replicating and then it bursts out and it causes physical symptoms in the body and then it jumps from one person to another person and causes them symptoms? No one's ever seen any of that, what I just described. Right. No one's ever seen the things that a virus is alleged to do.
Right.
And this goes back to the 1954 Enders and Peebles study, which you were referencing. And Enders won a Nobel Prize later in his career, so he was a very prominent guy. But basically, they took fluids from a person who had measles, and they presupposed that measles was caused by a virus.
They took snot, right?
I believe in that one, yes. Yeah. Usually it's like sputum or other, and then they'll often filter those fluids, and then they'll put it into a soup. It's called a cell culture, and this has all kinds of things in it, like antibiotics or monkey kidney cells, sometimes toxic stuff in it.
And it has fetal bovine serum very often,
Very often, yes. And
let's pause right there and just explain fetal bovine serum and how it's extracted.
You actually might know more about this than I do.
Oh, okay. Well, as I understand it, a pregnant cow that is, going to slaughter, but for scientific purposes, will have the fetus will be penetrated with an extended needle, which will puncture the heart of the bovine fetuses, which will puncture the heart of the bovine fetus. They'll extract that liquid, and that is what they then cook down to make fetal bovine serum, where they house the virus and do. And so the whole, just going into some of the psychosomatic and mystical and spiritual aspects, like, first off, at that point in the pregnancy, like, that fetus of the cow is experiencing pain and trauma. The mother must be experiencing significant trauma, being penned up and housed up, and this, some humanoid comes with this long needle to penetrate. So, like, the trauma that must be energetically infused into that serum is, like, off the charts. Yeah.
And that's just one of the things in this soup, including, like I said, antibiotics and monkey kidney cells, and there's a whole list. Depending on the study, they might vary the amounts of this stuff. So they take the fluids from a sick person and they put it into this soup, the cell culture. And if cells break down after adding fluids from a sick person, the scientists conclude we isolated the virus because they presuppose there was a virus in there. What they did was they changed the definition of the word isolation. So if people go on ChatGPT, of course, they're going to say the virus was isolated because they use this method of cell culture to isolate. Yes. But that's not actually isolating. As Dr. Tom Cowan would say, if you want to isolate a hammer from a toolbox, you take the hammer out of the toolbox and then you study the hammer and characterize it. You separate it from all other things.
Yes.
And this is important from the perspective of the scientific method, because if you want to have an independent variable, which is what you need in order to do the scientific method, you need to have the thing by itself that you add into the experiment, and then you see what the result is.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to see that viruses exist and cause disease, you'd want to have viruses by themselves and then introduce them into healthy organisms, for example, and see if they get sick.
Yeah.
But you need to have a virus by itself first.
Right.
So you never have an independent variable because they're just assuming that there's a virus because cells broke down in this cell culture, whereas there could be many reasons cells break down. Maybe there are poisonous things in the cell culture itself.
Yeah.
Maybe there are other things in the fluids from a sick person that get added, and that causes cells to break down. Like there are a lot of things other than a virus that could cause the cells to break down. But it is true that if a virus existed in the way that is believed, cells would break down. And this is a logical fallacy.
Right.
That just because a model can explain something doesn't mean the model is correct. Like rain causes wet grass, but observing wet grass, does that tell us that it rained?
Right.
No, it could be dew or sprinklers.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening here. It's called affirming the consequent. They say, oh, well, cells broke down, therefore a virus must have existed there, because if a virus did exist, then we would see cells breaking down. And this is the origin of the whole problem with virology, because this is how they isolate, quote unquote, viruses, but it's not actually isolating. And for me, the kicker when I was first learning about this, because I was pretty skeptical, this was 2023.
Yeah.
And since 2020, this became a much hotter topic because of everything in the world going on then.
Yeah.
There were some people saying, well, it was never been established. And I was skeptical of that. But then I learned about the work of Christine Massey and her colleagues. They have been submitting freedom of information requests to health organizations around the world, including the CDC, but many others. And it specifies in the request, please show me records of, you name the virus, that's been purified, not put through a cell culture. Very detailed request. And repeatedly they say, we have no records of this. And in one case, the Public Health Agency of Canada said, what you're asking for is not done in virology, I'm paraphrasing, because it violates the gold standard, which is always to use a cell culture.
Right.
So they're admitting they don't have an independent variable.
So they've cooked the books on the gold standard.
Yes.
Essentially.
They defined the gold standard and they said, well, this is what you have to do to isolate it. They changed the definition of isolation and they presuppose a virus is there. So then any analysis you see afterwards, like the electron microscope, because I can see your audience right now Googling, oh, well, I see a picture of a virus, Adam and Mark. What are you guys talking about? How do you know that thing's a virus? What's the process? Well, they're taking an unpurified sample.
Right.
And they're looking at it under an electron microscope. And in order to look under an electron microscope, you have to tamper with the sample, you have to slice it up, stain it with resin. You're looking at something that's dead and not moving.
Right.
What's a virus? It's getting inside of a host cell, replicating, bursting out, causing physical symptoms, going to another person or organism doing the same thing. That's not what you see. You see a structure that a scientist is telling you is a virus from an unpurified sample. See the problem?
Yeah. So when you're in this mid-range for me, glasses or no glasses, there we go. So, okay, if I'm approaching this like a 16-year-old arguing with other 16-year-olds, and one of the 16-year-olds says, okay, well, look, man, everybody in the crew was sick. I hung out with you guys and I got sick.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you explain that?
Yeah. It's again affirming the consequent logical fallacy. If a virus existed, then we could explain why a bunch of people get sick when they go to a party. We observed that a bunch of people get sick. Therefore, there was a virus. Aren't there a lot of other reasons people could get sick?
Yeah.
What else were they exposed to potentially? Could it have been toxins in the environment, in the building, food they ate, something in the water? Could there have been EMFs, electricity, that caused some kind of poisoning? Could there be some kind of energetic resonance between people? So when women cohabitate, sometimes their menstrual cycles will synchronize.
Right.
Not because of a virus. Sometimes people say that yawns are contagious because it's not some microbe that's going back and forth.
That's true.
And even if you move into the realm of like German New Medicine, when there's a psychological conflict, a conflict to the psyche, or even the resolution of conflict, then people can exhibit symptoms. So you have to think, well, what were people exposed to psychologically that might have shifted? The point is, we don't necessarily even have to know why people got sick. But if someone's claiming that a virus did it, the burden of proof is on them to show that that's the case.
And if honest, so if in this argument, a virus is just a viral contamination or exposure is just one of a possible 10 scenarios that got you sick, it doesn't justify a viral medical intervention to remedy the situation because it's all speculative.
Right. And it could be that there's a drug that is labeled antiviral, which might be a misnomer, that actually gets rid of symptoms. In the same way that, for example, chemotherapy or radiation, they might kill cancer, but it's not getting to the root cause of why the cancer is there.
Yes.
So they could be doing something to the metabolic activity, this antiviral drug that is alleviating symptoms, but not because it's targeting a virus per se. So anytime the word virus is used, viral test, antiviral, we have to go back to the original and say, well, how did they come to that? Like a genetic sequence, a viral genome. How can we know that the genome is viral if they're always taking it from a sample that has other things in it?
Yeah.
You'd want to have a sample of just viral genome and then sequence that. And there are a lot of questions about whether it's even being sequenced properly in a computer. It's sort of a black box and very complex. But let's assume it's all done properly, and let's assume everything we learn about genetics is real. You'd want to have a pure sample of just the virus so you know that every genetic fragment is viral. But if you always have an unpurified sample, how do you know that they're taking just viral stuff and not other things too?
And what's the justification for why can't you just take a nose swab or some snot and just test it immediately? Why do you have to put it in the solution?
Well, they'd have to pull out the virus from that.
But even so, at least that would be a more pure test. Here's your sputum, here's your mucus, here's your whatever it is. Just test it immediately. At least they're just filtering it from the other stuff that's in the snot, as opposed to adding all these other components to it, which can truly entirely manipulate it.
Well, often the scientists do filter and they use ultracentrifugation, different techniques. But the question is, how do you know that there's just a virus in that sample?
Once you add all these other things, there's just so many variables.
Not adding all those other things,
yes.
because you're taking fluids from a sick person. There's a lot of other stuff in there.
Right, but at least it's just the pure fluid from the sick person. It doesn't have all these other adjuvants and stuff added to it. So,
but then you're still stuck with the structures of, if the person's sick, who knows what else their body's producing?
Yeah. Break down German New Medicine, because I know that's become very influential for you personally and in the terms of conversation professionally. So what is German New Medicine? And then we'll naturally see how it relates to this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, so I'm going to give the novice version.
Yeah.
But basically it talks about the relationship between the psyche and physical health. So that when people experience what's known as a conflict shock, which I'll define in a moment, that can result in physical symptoms. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, that intuitively makes sense. Sometimes if we're really traumatized, then we might get sick or might think that there's something to it. Right. But in German New Medicine, the correlation that's made actually has to do with brain scans. And the way they describe it is psyche-brain organ, meaning there's a shock to the psyche, then it shows up in the brain on a CT scan. You see a lesion in the brain. Dr. Hammer from Germany discovered this.
And by shock, you mean emotional shock.
Yeah. So
we're not talking impact.
Right.
So an emotion can make it, because everybody could imagine that, a concussion can form a lesion.
This is something in the psyche. And the way they define it is not just any trauma. It has to be distressing, which a trauma would be, but the person feels isolated in dealing with it. That's one of the key things. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it's also unexpected.
And then
So it's unexpected, isolated, and distressing, and that's a conflict shock. It shows up as a lesion in the brain, and that is correlated with an organ, psyche-brain organ. So after enough of these cases, if a person has a symptom, and you talk to a German New Medicine practitioner, they'll say, oh, well, you're dealing with a separation conflict. And it's a very complex area, and this is why I say I'm a novice, because depending on the type of conflict you're dealing with, that will determine when the symptoms occur. Sometimes symptoms occur while the conflict is still active in the person's life. Mm-hmm. Other times the symptoms occur when the conflict is resolved. So it's like the person's been dealing with this conflict and their body's building up all this stuff, and then they resolve the conflict and then all of it's flushed out, and we call it some disease.
Yeah.
So when I was referring to this, people go to a party and some of them get sick. What if they all resolved a similar conflict because they were isolated for a while, then they went to the party, and then they resolved that conflict? It's just something else to consider.
I also, okay, well, let's stay with that, then I'll go back. Okay, so if that's the kind of informative, therapeutic reasoning behind like what's causing disease, what's their modalities for healing and curing in German New Medicine?
Good question. It really depends on the case,
okay,
what the person's dealing with. So to me, it's more of it's a way of understanding and a way of alleviating fear around symptoms, or at least understanding them differently. And then it becomes a question of what you do about it.
Okay. Do they use like frequency healings? Do they use?
From the people that I've spoken with, it just depends on on the practitioner and depends on the condition.
Cool.
I mean, all that stuff is usually helpful to help the body get into homeostasis.
You're going, and the retreat that you're going to is German New Medicine retreat, right?
No.
Oh,
No,
it's not.
No, that's just more. So Dr. Tom Cowan has a new biology clinic, which I think is really interesting because they look at not just the germ theory of disease. Actually, they challenge the germ theory of disease, but they're looking at all these issues of what's going on in your life, what are the toxins you're exposed to, and different kinds of alternative therapies.
I often wonder, well, oh God, I'm going to screw this up. I should have prepped this one because I had a feeling it was going to come up. Wasn't there an experiment done in physics recently in which the direction of the energy wave was changing depending on whether the people who were running the experiment were looking at it or looking away?
Okay. Yeah, so there's a phenomenon in physics. It's known as the observer effect.
That's what I love about you.
Yeah.
It's nice to have smart friends. You can get close, and then they oh, then this is it.
So the famous double slit experiment, and I'm just going to simplify this. Whether it looks like a wave or a particle is dependent upon whether there's an observer. The question in physics is, what does it mean to be an observer? Does it mean you're shining light on it and that changes whether it's the behavior is wave-like or particle-like? Or is it the mind that's actually steering the experiment? Which sounds crazy because most people think that the mind has no effect on the physical world. But there have been some studies on this, and I'm actually on the board of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Dr. Dean Radin, who's the chief scientist there, has done these studies where he says, hey, Adam, I want you to put your mind to this experiment and try to make it more particle-like than wave-like. And what he finds is that statistically speaking, people are able to steer the wave function with their mind. They're changing the behavior of the experiment by putting their mind on it. So this is a little bit different than German New Medicine, but it's related.
Well, the reason I wanted you to substantiate the next thing that I'm going to bring up, which is, so you have this university and you have the graduate students and professors in the university, and they're at the graduate level, so they're all getting paid for and funded, and their education at the graduate level is being paid for. And then you have the NIH or the pharmaceutical company or the NGO that's paying for the research, and there is a desired outcome of what they would like to see happen. And then you have all this waves, you could say, of financial pressure, expectation, consequence, all this other energy that's impacting their mind, that's mixing up everything in the petri dish after pulling out some snot from patient Z. Like, what the fuck's going to end up being energetically introduced into that petri dish? Because there's a whole institution that has generations of energy for a desired outcome that keep the ivory towers up and functioning and prospering.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it really challenges the scientific method in general, because we always would then have to think about these energies or the impact of the mind, which we can't isolate as an independent variable because we don't even know how many forces are involved energetically.
When we go back to your book about consciousness, not even your mind, but the hundreds of thousands of minds that have been a part of this university since 1920.
Yes, exactly.
They're all coalescing into this petri dish.
So there's some studies on this. It's called psychokinesis, which is where the mind impacts matter. And these studies were done at Princeton, for example, the former dean of engineering. I didn't know about this when I was an undergrad.
Shout out to Princeton.
But and some other places too, where they set up machines. They're called random number generators. And these machines spit out zeros and ones over and over again. And because it's random, over time, it's 50% ones, 50% zeros. The experimenters will say, Adam, I want you to try to make the machine produce more ones than zeros with your mind. You're not going to touch the machine. And repeatedly, people are doing this. And these are not experienced psychics. Sometimes they're college sophomores. And they're able to alter the behavior of these machines, statistically speaking. So
anybody who's married can relate to this, because if your wife's mind is aligned to something, the whole doesn't even have to be expressed. The whole energy of the household is going to change. So I'm going to share something personal, and then I want you to kind of break it down with your understanding of physics and metaphysics. So my son, who drives, was asked to run an errand for my mom, to take her to the doctor's appointment and the hospital. And this son in particular is a very high level athlete, took a heavy duty immune system hit about 18 months ago. And so we're always very cognizant of his immune system and rebuilding his immune system so he can stay on course with his, pro path. So I'm like, hey, it's your grandma, you got to do it. My wife's energy goes to picking up grandma. Grandma's always sick, walking into the assisted living facility, all the germs, everything that's present in the energy even of the, we're always worried about shedding. That's our thing as a family. So we have this whole sense of energy that surrounds now, unfortunately, since of who are we interacting with, did they get vaccinated, is there shedding, is there vaccine shedding, what's going on, putting this person in your car, taking this person to the hospital, dropping them to the hospital. So we have this whole energy that surrounds this. But then there's fidelity and duty and service. And so my wife, squashes her feelings, and the dutiful grandson does the duty, picks up the grandma, does it, and brings her back. 2 days later, my son is sick. I said to my wife, just thinking, God, it's so interesting, but like, do you think he's sick? Because grandma's not sick and there's no outbreak in the facility right now. Like, do you think just the energy that we might be creating now around, like, since especially around grandma and the hospital and all this stuff, like, do you think that did that? And my wife had a meltdown. Like this hit her so hard. The consequence that her energy could have made her own child sick, put her in. And I'm like, no. I was just talking theoretically. I'm not blaming you. I was just in my head, just expressing. We're actually having a really interesting conversation with my son, who was laying on the couch. Like, could this energetic have made you sick? My son and I, as men, we could talk about this theoretically. My wife went into the emotional state. But like, I don't know, man. Do you kind of think that's what's going on? Or is it feasible?
To me, it's all possible. I really don't know.
Yeah.
That's why I end up in the place of I'm not really sure why we get sick, and it's probably multifactorial. I would want to know what was going on in your son's life, what else he was exposed to, what other emotional things he was dealing with, what did he eat that day, what was going on when
I shared this with our mutual friend Cal Callahan. And my wife and I had this kind of blow up about this. And I'm like, sweetie, I was just talking theoretically, intellectually, and she was in an emotional state. And it's just one of those impasses that kind of men and women hit, and you got to just take a little space. And we've gotten very, very good at that. So I called Cal to vent, or Cal doesn't like to talk, so I left him an extended voice note. That's an inside joke. Cal Callahan from The Great Unlearned is a very good friend. So I leave him a voice note. I'm like, God damn it, dude. Fuck, man, do I miss the days before COVID where I have such an energetic that I carry now around COVID and these goddamn like I have and everything that I've read about the shedding and then the fluid, the gel that the was kind of housed into and all the implications of that. Like, it has a whole stigma around it. And so I now carry this stigma around everybody I interact with, which is an energy. And a guy like me, like, I'm very aware of the energy. And I was like, I just so miss the days when I didn't even think like that. Like just 5 or 6 years ago, like if somebody was an asshole to me, they were just an asshole. Maybe issues with their mom or their family, this or that. Like the whole idea of them being influenced by like a dark gel that's sending to their brain and they're being controlled by EMFs and this shedding and all this other fucking shit. Like, I didn't have to think like that. So like, I'm so aware these days that I'm carrying like an energetic level of thought that is influencing maybe my environment, but certainly influencing my enjoyment of my environment, and then lowering my own frequency, probably lowering the frequency of everybody around me, so that those things then start to become true and you manifest those things. Like my kid going from doing something nice to grandma to now a emotional ordeal and biological risk that then had a manifestation 2 days later.
We know the placebo effect is real.
That's real.
Doctors will acknowledge that. So there's something to it. And if we acknowledge, now we're getting a little bit into a different area, but my whole journey started when I wrote my first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, which is about the idea that our consciousness isn't something that just pops out of our brain, but rather that our brain and the body system sort of receive consciousness, and that perhaps consciousness is the fundamental basis of all reality. Like nothing's physical,
Yes.
everything's consciousness. And if we adopt that, even some percentage, then it would make sense that when you shift your consciousness in a certain direction, reality will shift. They go together.
Yes.
So it really does depend on the metaphysics. And I lean in that direction where I think consciousness is impactful. And those studies, like with the random number generators, they suggest that too.
Yeah. Actually, and Cal, in the voice note he left back to me, had some real wisdom that essentially, like, we should all thank it in a way because it will expose so many fallacies, so many misnomers, so many dangerous parasitic ideas that have dominated our culture, but it also provides us the exquisite opportunity to raise our own frequency, so that frequency can become impenetrable and uplift the world around us. Like, so as opposed to thinking about your son putting himself at risk because he's going to pick up grandma, if you can get the frequency of service and of love and fidelity so high that that's impenetrable. Like, so the frequency of the grandson going to do service for his grandmother is a fortified shield of protection that he's going to be entirely safe in what he's doing because he's providing the service. So that was pretty profound to me. That kind of brought me back to, well, this realization since kind of, I think, our friendship and your work, also this lunatic Benjamin Farley and ether and the upside down spinning, which I've done a couple podcasts with, that the fundamental responsibility, for me, this is my new mantra, the fundamental responsibility of a conscientious human being is to reclaim your sovereignty and raise your frequency. That's it. Then the whole world changes. Your life changes. Everybody around you gets influenced, and then the whole world changes.
Yeah, I think it also allows one to not succumb to fear.
Yes.
It's to acknowledge that there are dangers, but not live in fear about it. There's a difference.
Yeah. Okay, so like to wrap up the virology part, they've never been, and there's no absolute that this is what causes disease or sickness at all. So that any kind of institutional mandates that come down are completely based on a fallacy.
Right. They're based on pseudoscience by definition.
Yes.
Because science would be following the scientific method, meaning
Yes.
you have an independent variable and then also proper controls, which are problematic in these studies too. So no independent variable, no proper controls, that's pseudoscience. They're inferring a virus was there causing the symptoms rather than something else.
Yeah.
But the second part of it, we talked about, does a virus exist and then cause disease? What shocked me when I started researching this is even if we haven't isolated a virus, you'd think that it would be super easy to transmit a quote unquote virus or a germ from a sick organism to a healthy one. So take some sick people, put them with healthy people, and the healthy ones should get sick.
Yeah.
This was actually done around the Spanish flu, the Milton Rosenau studies. They took people sick with the Spanish flu. This was the most contagious thing ever. And they tried everything and they couldn't make anyone sick. They injected fluids from the sick people into the healthy people. The healthy people didn't get sick. They coughed. The sick people coughed in the faces of the healthy people and they didn't get sick. So what's going on here? How has contagion...
What was the control group? Any idea of what instructions they were given? Did they have an energetic sense of like fear that this is somebody with Spanish flu coughing my face, or it was a little more neutral?
I don't recall the specifics.
But even so, let's say they did even have that fear and that concern. They still didn't
get sick,
yeah.
No matter what it was. Yeah. And then looking at other studies of how has contagion been demonstrated, like polio, for example, that's believed to be this contagious virus.
God.
How did they demonstrate contagion? Well, we know they didn't isolate the virus because it was never isolated.
Yeah.
So whatever they're dealing with is a unified sample. But they took these unidentified samples and were injecting them into monkey brains and passing from monkey to monkey. And then what do you know? A monkey got sick when you injected an unpurified sample into its brain.
Which would go back to toxicology, not virology. You put a toxic substance penetrated into the brain of all places. Who's to say just the penetration into the brain?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, exactly. This is totally unnatural. That's not how it happens in nature. People aren't getting polio because they're injected with something in their brain. So these studies are pretty wild when you look at it. They're taking an unpurified sample, typically introducing it into the organism in an unnatural way, and then an animal gets sick and they say, we demonstrated contagion. So they didn't purify the sample of the virus by itself.
Yeah.
And then they didn't demonstrate contagion in a natural way.
Yeah. And then, oh gosh, I forgot the name of the moth and I forgot the name of the book. But I mean, the whole history of correlates entirely with the advent of modern farming practices and lead and arsenic in the fertilizers and the first use of pesticides. And then that moth that was plaguing the South, where they started doing all the spraying. Everywhere they were spraying, and all the farm animals and everything.
Yeah, there's a correlation between pesticide use and polio.
Yeah. Do you remember the name of the moth?
I don't remember the name of the moth, but
there's a really good book written about it.
Jim West wrote a book about toxicology, and there is another one, and I don't recall the name of it, where moth is in the title about polio.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. That's kind of heavy duty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's really about logic. Often, it's people are observing people getting sick, and then they come to a conclusion about why it happened, and they don't consider many possibilities.
Okay, I lost the question, but it just came back to me. So, you were you have been in the inside mechanisms of how our nation's business institutions work from the financial trading standpoint, both when you were first at Wall Street and then seeing those implications as trends when you were in Silicon Valley. If we were to really call into question virology, and then that would cause us to call into question the way medicine is practiced in this country, the way the pharmaceutical industry can operate in this country, economically, like what would happen?
It's such a massive domino effect, because how many treatments and tests are based on the belief in viruses? And then with regard to and there's basically a massive industry around that. So it's probably, it's so massive, it's probably hard to conceive how big it is, because the germ theory of disease, especially viruses, that is core to modern medicine.
And also, but just in our economy, I mean, just people being sick, keeping people sick, sending out the medicines, keeping people sick. I'm going to blow that. Like this, hundreds of billions of dollars in the economy and jobs and everything.
Versus getting to the root cause of why people actually got sick. And maybe if they resolved a conflict in their life or stopped eating a toxic food or something, simpler solutions that would be much less revenue producing for an industry.
That's wild. Do you think, I don't know, what do you think is possible from a social level, from the standpoint of our country? Like, does it need to happen slowly, or can we abruptly make these changes without kind of having us fall apart as a nation and so forth? Or looks like we're gonna fall apart if we don't embrace these changes. I don't know. Put your economist hat back on, your financial hat back on, and kind of walk us through your new worldview and understanding. Mark Gober, the writer and researcher, and like how this can interact from a global economic standpoint.
People still get sick.
Yeah.
So there would be new ways of treating them. They wouldn't just be looking at the virus angle. They'd be looking at other angles, and that would create business. So I think there would be new services to fill the need.
Yeah.
That's how a marketplace works, is that people demand things, consumers need things, goods and services, and then entrepreneurs emerge in order to fulfill those needs.
Yeah. And then there's a period of disruption and retraining, and then people survive. Countries survive. Nations survive. They rebuild. They reformulate. They Yeah. I guess, yeah, humans are very resourceful.
I
And
think this
resilient.
one is a tough one because there's so much is dependent upon the belief in viruses and germ theory more generally that there's going to be an incentive not to even ask the questions that we're asking on the show. Even among those who question, for example. I mean, think about it. If there's no, then why would you need to forget about the toxicity?
100%.
You just knock out the whole argument. But that's usually the argument is at the level of the toxins, which that's important too. But it's to get to this next level, I find that it's very challenging for people to ask these questions, often because they don't know the arguments. They just say, oh, that's just some kind of crazy psyop conspiracy theory, and it came up around 2020, and just because people were trying to discredit the health freedom movement. But actually, the notion of viruses as an intracellular parasite, the current definition, that wasn't until the 1950s. And then the HIV/AIDS era, there was an organization called the Perth Group. They have a website, theperthgroup.com, Perth. They were asking the same questions. Is HIV actually a virus? Or do people get sick? They are getting sick. Are there other reasons that we can explain it beyond this alleged retrovirus? Yeah. But most people, what I'm finding is that they get so resistant. What do you mean there's no, we just had the whole world shut down, and I can go on Google and see this electron microscope, and I can type in the word isolation. There are 1,000 papers that claim a virus was isolated. They're often not aware of what does isolation mean? What are they looking at under that electron microscope? It's a small subsegment of the population right now that's even asking that.
Have you ever heard the line? If I screw this up, I apologize. You might know it better than me. There's the great line from the writer, John Steinbeck. It's amazing how difficult it is to get a man to understand something when his livelihood is based upon him not understanding.
Yeah. The incentive is not there for these industries.
But also, there's a significant consequence to, if you're a pediatrician and you get a couple $100,000 a year bonus because 80% of your clinic is fully vaccinated, then the fuck, man, that's like you got a staff, you got a nice life, you got your house, you got your vacations, you got all this shit. And then you have the emotional consequence of if you've been practicing medicine in a potentially harmful way for the past 20 years. There's just a lot of people going like, they just can't take that on.
Yeah.
That's overwhelming.
And you could lose your license. I mean, some of the people that have been speaking out, Dr. Stefan Lanka, he was a classically trained virologist, and he's speaking out against all these issues. Dr. Tom Cowan, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, and Mark Bailey and Sam Bailey. It's very difficult to stay in the mainstream medical community speaking about these things. It takes a very brave individual. And for many people, it makes sense. I've got bills to pay. I'm not going to speak out even if I see a problem.
Yeah, well, because, the thing that a lot of people, it's the insidious nature of when the system starts to hit you first financially. Reputation is one thing, but when they start to take away your livelihood, one, and then also hit you with other lawsuits, even if they know they're bullshit and dismissible, those are a lot of $900 an hour chings or $500 an hour chings every time you got to call your lawyer to defend something or write a paper. You start to get a couple hundred of those, they're fine. You're fucked.
Right. So it makes sense why this kind of information would not make it out, even if there's a real problem scientifically, because the incentive is not there. The incentive is the reverse, is to keep the status quo going.
When do you think we're going to be able to get to a point where an intelligent defendant with a well-trained ChatGPT AI in lawyer mode, you could just go in and just repeat the question to your ChatGPT and they could answer it in lawyer mode?
I've actually
did you see, let me just preface this. Did you see Luke's story on Unchained Earth when he did his whole sovereign citizenship?
No.
Okay, so Luke is very much into sovereign citizenship. Luke Story, the lifestylist, he's another kind of mutual friend. And for people out there, if you're interested in sovereign citizenship and the origins of the United States financial system and how it enslaves and entraps us and how we're essentially a unwitting micro corporation in service to a series of parent corporations that ultimately stop at the United States corporation that overlays itself as a corporate entity on top of the landmass and the people of the United States. And then that happens at the state level, the county level, the town level. They're all corporations in servicing upward. So this is thousands of hours of study and research to become an expertise in that. And Luke just asked a series of informed questions to a trained AI, this Ether AI, and it was a fucking masterclass in the history of U.S. citizenship, distilled in like bullet point form that anybody could understand. It's fantastic and fascinating in and of itself. But I was thinking, like, what the fuck's going to happen to a lawyer? Holy shit. It's better than any lawyer could distill it.
I mean, you can go in ChatGPT and ask it to create a brief, and it'll do it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But with regard to this topic of virology, if you feed it the right information, it will force itself to come to a logical conclusion.
And Alex Zek did that. Alex Zek on The Way Forward. If you go to Alex Zek, The Way Forward on Spotify, and just do virology, he has a 2.5-hour masterclass on this whole topic that's extraordinarily well done. And he uses a disagreeable AI to ultimately turn and agree with what he's saying by just analysis of like answering yes and no, what's truthful. It's quite extraordinary. It's both a commentary on virology and modern technology manipulation, how it can kind of both be, he simultaneously turns them both on their head.
Yes, because you see the bias in the AI.
Yeah.
When I do it, I mean, if you ask, has a virus been isolated? And they'll give you this long answer about how it's been isolated. And then you ask it, well, is there actually an independent variable? And then you get it to admit. And typically it'll say, well, they've largely isolated the virus and gotten it by itself. And you have to push it and say, well, is it just the virus by itself? So it's a true independent variable. You have to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And you have to feed it the freedom of information request from Christine Massey to show, well, this virus, the CDC said it wasn't purified without using a cell culture. And eventually it will admit that virology is pseudoscience.
That's wild. You got to push this technology that everybody just automatically assumes is non-biased and truthful.
Totally biased.
And
then people believe it and
largely,
they use that as...
And largely not truthful. Yeah. Man, that's pretty heavy duty. Okay, switching subjects to my favorite one, the shape of the earth. So, remind us of how your latest book about cosmology, like what triggered that for you, and what brought you to the subject?
I wrote the book before it is called An End to Upside Down Medicine, questioning virology and germ theory of disease, looking at consciousness and health. And what I learned is that many people who were asking what I thought were very good questions about medicine were saying, Mark, you've got to look at cosmology because the same logical fallacies you see in medicine, they're doing that in cosmology. And then there was a book that came out, Dr. Stephen A. Young, Theoretical Physics PhD, in April of 2024. It's called A Fool's Wisdom. And in that book, he says, I can't say with 100% certainty what this place is, but I can tell you with 100% certainty what it's not, and it's not a spinning globe. And he went through many of the reasons why he doesn't think it's a spinning globe. So this guy is a credentialed physicist, and he was actually trying to debunk quote unquote flat earth claims because he said, oh, this is ridiculous. And basically he couldn't prove the spinning globe. So I said I had to look into this. I mean, this is huge, if true.
Yeah.
And the more I looked into it, I couldn't prove the spinning globe either. It's similar to virology in that, what's a virus? It's claimed to be this thing that gets inside of cells, causes disease, goes from one organism to another. We've never observed that. Spinning globe. Have we observed that? Well, let's look at all elements of it. To me, because actually it's beyond just Earth. It's where do we live? What's the cosmos?
Can I just pause 1 second?
Yeah.
Because I just had this... The only thing that seems to exist in the context of how we understand a virus is a bad idea. Boy, can a bad idea spread.
Right.
Because what you were just talking about a virus that, no, it doesn't exist and can't spread and all these things can't be proven. I'm like, but you can sure prove that a bad idea can spread like that. A bad idea can jump from one mind to the next mind to 1,000 minds, and then it gets on a TV and has a megaphone and goes into 1,000,000 minds. And fuck, dude. I mean, essentially, the only way that you could, the only type of virus that I think is proven provable is a bad idea.
Or like malware on computers.
Yeah.
But not a genetic parasite, that we're told.
But a frequency, boy, can that spread.
Yeah, the term Wetiko, mind virus.
Yeah. Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there's this parallel here of we haven't directly observed a virus doing the things it's alleged to do.
Yes.
Have we observed directly the things that we're told about the cosmos? Well, first, the reason that Earth is supposed to be a spinning globe is because there was a big bang that led us to this point 13.8 billion years ago. Obviously, no one's observed that. We've inferred that it happened based on a bunch of observations, and then they create a model that could explain those observations.
Yeah.
There are a lot of holes with the Big Bang, but let's leave that aside.
Yeah.
But then let's get to our solar system of Earth revolving around the sun and Earth being one planet around the sun. We've all seen that picture, right?
Yeah.
Mercury, Mars, Venus, Earth, all these planets around the sun. No one's ever seen that.
Yeah, let me kind of, I'm going to physics. Okay, so sun, this is the Earth.
Yes.
So we're
going around the sun. That's the model. And we're one of many planets doing that.
Planets, but then we're also doing this.
Rotating.
We're rotating as we go around the sun. Let's go through those speeds. So what's this speed?
Revolving around the sun in a state of free fall, by the way, over 66,000 miles an hour.
So let's talk about this. So this is happening. That's revolving.
Yes.
This and that speed again?
66,000 plus miles per hour.
So yeah, interesting number. 66,600, I think, or something about it, isn't it? Wow. Okay. So, and then we're doing this at
rotating on a tilted axis.
Yeah.
At the equator, it's roughly 1,000 miles an hour, which is faster than the speed of sound. But at the poles, because of the way a ball would turn, it's much slower.
Yeah. And then simultaneously, so this is happening, but then there's a free fall at the same time.
Well, Earth is free falling around the sun.
But that means the sun has to free fall, or we would just drop, the sun would stay here, and we would just...
It's complicated because the whole solar system is expanding because we're an expanding universe.
Yeah.
Over 1 million miles an hour.
Yeah.
And also the Milky Way, we're moving around the Milky Way at over 500,000 miles an hour in this vacuum of space.
Let's just, I hope my son's friends are watching this. Okay, so sun... So this is 66,600 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
This is at the equator, 1,000 miles per hour. And then the plummeting is the free falling?
I'm not sure how to describe that because that's around the Milky Way.
Yeah.
It's 500,000 plus miles an hour.
500,000 plus miles an hour. So is there, you could bust out your phone to do this, but what's the compounded sense of total movement? So if we have 1,000, if we have 66,600, and then we have 1,000, and then we have 500,000, is that just 500,000, 68,000 miles? Because basically you have to, if you add the 500,000 plus the 66,600 plus the 1,000, is it a multiple or is it just, you just add them simply up?
That's a good question.
Because what I'm just trying to get people, this is I just want you to contemplate that in your body. That there is, and I'm not even saying, a mathematician might be able to say, because it might be compounded, but if we just take the numbers together, 500,000. So now we have 500,000 plus 66,000 plus 1,000. So that's
67,000.
67,000, let's say. So that's 567,000 plus that's 568,000 miles per hour of compounded motion.
Plus 1 million plus miles an hour because we're in an expanding universe. So we're constantly expanding outward.
Okay. So we're going to call
millions.
So basically we're at about 1.6 million miles per hour of total motion.
At least.
At least. And we have no sensation of this at all on our planet or in our bodies.
And yet you feel an earthquake.
Okay. For those out there in the land, just ask yourself that question. Does that make any sense at all? That we could have 1.6 million miles per hour of compounded motion without any sensation on our planet or in our bodies.
Yeah. Our everyday experience is that we live in a stationary place.
Yes.
And we've never observed Earth's motion. That's the reality. We've never seen Earth revolving around the sun. And we've never seen a video of a globe doing a full rotation, which is what you'd want to do for a spinning globe proof.
Right.
For direct observation of the thing claimed. We have no direct observations of these things. We have models that have been created. That's the mind-blowing part. Just like a virus, we haven't seen a virus directly observed doing the things it is alleged to do. We haven't seen the mainstream cosmology observed.
Yeah. Do you believe in kinesthetic testing, muscle testing? I mean, I know
I've
there's
explored it. I mean, yeah, it has to be done properly.
Yeah, I would like, it'd be very interesting to have a group of people just kind of like, if there's somebody, if you're having a party or if people listen to this and there's a group and like, okay, stand up and I'm just going to muscle test like, we live on a somewhat undefinable stationary plane, see how stronger you are, or we live on a, compounded motion of 1.6 million miles worth of total motion on a spinning globe, see how strong or weak you are. It'd be interesting to see like, because in my body, like I just get weaker talking about that. Like I do a lot of muscle testing. We go to, he's been on the podcast, Ron Bonuelos, like really high-end acupuncturist, healers and so forth. They use the muscle testing. And muscle testing for my own children has been so accurate. Like it nails things that like high-end testing can't find. Like it nails things. So I don't know, man. If you're just kind of sitting in with the wisdom of your body, like that model just doesn't make any sense.
It only makes sense because we've been told by experts. Same with virology.
Yes.
We wouldn't know that there's this parasite unless an expert told us. So there's something about not trusting our senses that we're seeing all over the place at the small scale and at the big scale. Our everyday experience is that we're not moving. Our everyday experience is that we're not living on a sphere because a sphere would have down and away curvature. We never see that.
Never see that.
We see peaks and valleys for sure. We see circularity because of the way our eyes see. It's known as perspective.
Yeah.
Things in the distance look differently, but that's not the same as down and away curvature. A sphere would go down and away. We never observe down and away. Our everyday experience is stationary topographical plane. That doesn't prove that it's true, but we'd have to then overcome our everyday experience of stationary topographical plane in order to verify it, and that hasn't been directly verified.
And the Earth is also based on their model of the Earth's size and curvature. So it's 8 inches per mile, but it's squared, right? So isn't it? So the first mile is an 8-inch drop. The next mile it's like a 32-inch drop.
Yeah. Well, there's different. I've heard debates about this calculation, what the correct one to use is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what you're getting at is there should be things that are invisible to us if you're standing at one place on the curve. Because if it's blocked by the curve, if it's so far away, it would be like trying to see around a bend. You can't,
right?
Because it would be blocked by Earth. And there are many instances where people have done the math and they've incorporated what their altitude is and they've seen things that are too far away.
Yes. I mean, that's just, it's just, so even just using their own Earth calculations, like things don't make sense. Like the Nikon P1000 telescope and the depths. And then there's Cal, I've talked about this with you. Cal's talked about this with you. Endless people. Is that if you go on one side of Lake Michigan with a Nikon P1000, you can shoot across from Indiana into Chicago, and you're seeing a level of the Sears Tower that you should never be able to see. It should be well behind the curvature of the Earth. So that doesn't make sense. And then there's that amazing one in France, right? The 276 miles, like the longest flat Earth.
Is it the mountain?
Not flat Earth, but the longest straight line photographic capture is like 276 miles.
I don't recall the exact number, but
something about that. I'm pretty good with this one because I talk about it a lot. I think it's 276 miles, and it should never happen.
Yeah,
based on the Earth's curvature calculator.
And there are many of these examples that people go out and they do the math and they say, I'm just going to look as far as I can, and is that mountain range visible or not? There's a good example, actually, that isn't talked about as much. There was this expedition known as the Final Experiment, where people went to Antarctica to see whether or not there was a sun in the sky for 24 hours in the southern hemisphere summer, because on the globe model, it would predict that you would see the sun for 24 hours. They called it the Final Experiment. Actually, it's the single observation. That's what I call it.
Yes.
Because they observed one thing in one place. Antarctica is supposed to be this massive place. You need to replicate it in many places. But what's not often talked about is that, like Austin Whitsitt, for example, he was one of the globe skeptics who went. Many of the people who went were globe believers, but he was a globe skeptic. And I've heard him talk about this, that they were looking at mountain ranges that should have been blocked by the curvature of Earth. They were visible.
Yeah, but also like they were allowed to bring one bag. The people who were in support of the globe theory could bring unlimited amounts of bags and testing equipment. Like the whole Petri dish, again, what they allowed to be put in the Petri dish was totally manipulated from the beginning.
That one location also. And it's a logical fallacy. If Earth were a globe, they would observe 24-hour sun in the sky. They observe 24-hour sun in the sky, therefore Earth is a globe. There are many other reasons that could have happened.
How do you explain this and this and this?
Yeah.
I understand.
It's a
And
fallacy.
the other thing, did you coin the term globe skeptic, or is that out there?
I used it in my book. I don't know if it's been used elsewhere, because that's what I like to describe
Yeah, no, that's
rather
great.
than flat earth or whatever,
Yeah.
because I actually don't know, and we can't know because we haven't observed enough to know.
Trademark it immediately. Globe skepticism. I mean, that's really what it's about. And that's what all your work is. Your work comes to a definitive point of what you can no longer believe.
Right. A claim has been put forth. We can evaluate that claim and show the claim's falsified. We don't have to know what the replacement answer is. We're allowed to say, I don't know, but I know it's not that. And I'm not going to say that's true just because I don't have a replacement. That's often what people do. The example I use in my book is, imagine you're taking a multiple choice test. And Adam and I, we're on a team together. And the teacher says, you need to tell me whether the answer is A, B, C, or D. And you go look at it for a while. I look at it for a while. You come back to me and you say, Mark, for these reasons, it's definitely A. We're going to submit that to the teacher. Then I come to you and say, I hear you, but there are these few reasons why A can't be true. And you're like, all right, Mark, but is it B, C, or D? What are we going to submit to the teacher? And I say, well, I don't know. I haven't done the analysis yet. And then you say, well, then we've got to go with A.
Right.
That's what a lot of people end up doing. It sounds silly, but that's what they do. It's like, well, you can't tell me what's true, so I'm going to go with the default, even though the default's been falsified.
Right. Well, because we have we have institutions that want a definitive answer on everything and then keep moving forward, don't mind this and keep shopping. In your research and knowledge base, how much did you go into some of the just bizarre anomalies and extraordinary individuals behind, like, NASA and that whole kind of thing? Did you look into that?
I did go into that. The rituals in the desert, Jack Parsons.
Because as I understand this, now I talk about this a lot. I mean, I'm a published novelist, but unfortunately I read so little these days. It's terrible, just between the business, the wife, the kids, and blah, blah, grinding. But as I understand it, NASA was formed by, I think there was a governmental body that kind of brought these four individuals together. But Jack Parsons from Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And then you had Werner von Braun. And then you had Walt Disney was somehow involved in this as well. And then L. Ron Hubbard. Is that correct?
The way I understand it is that Jack Parsons was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he was working with L. Ron Hubbard and basically doing occult rituals in the desert.
This is
try to summon the Antichrist.
Okay, hold on. So let me go. You jumped ahead. I'm trying to Socratically kind of lead you there. So as I understand this, there is significant scholarship that Jack Parsons was a devotee, a direct devotee of Aleister Crowley, who was the head of the Satanic Church and kind of wrote the Satanic Bible, right?
He was an occultist.
An occultist, yeah. And that, and then Werner von Braun, we all know, was a legit Nazi who was the head of the rocket experiments for, and would literally murder 5 Jews, the slowest working Jews, every day. Is that fallacy, or is that?
I don't know about that one, but he was a Nazi and he was brought over in Operation Paperclip. That's widely acknowledged. And he did work with Walt Disney in terms of bringing a space narrative out.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And so we've got Jack Parsons, who's a satanic occultist. We have L. Ron Hubbard, who is a kind of a false messiah, delusional narcissist.
Founder of the Church of Scientology.
Which, they have some health protocols that I think are kind of, I don't want to shit on the whole thing because I'm not all that familiar, but I do know that they have this system of health and nutrition and the way you approach food and sweating and saunas that I think is, so there's some aspects to it. I don't want to condemn the whole thing and people involved in that, but he has his whole history. And so you've got these 4 characters that are getting together. Was there some governing body at the top that was kind of organized, or Jack Parsons was given the directive to put the team together and form NASA?
I don't know the dynamics of that, but it was the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that formed NASA.
Yeah.
That was the precursor organization.
So let's just wrap our heads around that. Like, the foremost scientific body in the world for the modern understanding of space was formed by a devout Satanist, a quasi-messiah with a messianic, and wanting to create kind of a new religion revolving largely around his infallible brilliance, Walt Disney, and a devout Nazi. Just let that sink in. Like, that's who's educating your child about the shape of the Earth and our cosmos.
I played around with ChatGPT and the AIs on this, and I'll say, would you trust an organization that was founded by a former Nazi and someone who was doing occult sex rituals in the desert? And they'd say, no, you should never trust such an organization. And then I say, well, do you know this about NASA? And it will say, well, actually, it's a little bit different, and it makes a bunch of excuses.
Yeah. What else are your favorite globe skepticism points? Your kind of highlights.
There's a type of lunar eclipse. It's called a selenelian eclipse. A lunar eclipse is when Earth's allegedly at the center and it's getting in the way of the sun's light. And so it's Earth in the middle, sun, moon.
Yeah.
Make sense?
So we got we can't see it. There's no point in doing that. Okay.
Yeah, so Earth's in the middle, sun and the moon on each side.
Earth, sun, moon. Yeah.
And there's a type of lunar eclipse, a selenelian lunar eclipse, where you can see the eclipsed moon and the sun in the sky above the horizon at the same time.
So you can see the eclipsed moon and sun at the same time. So, okay, my vantage point is here. Here are my eyes. And I'm looking outward and I'm perceiving both the sun and the moon being partially eclipsed simultaneously.
You're seeing the eclipsed moon and the sun.
But am I seeing it like a tennis match? Or am I seeing it?
You can see them both above the horizon, which should not happen.
In my bifocal vision, not turning my head side to side like a tennis match. So just if I'm looking straight ahead in my sphere of vision, call that, I don't know, 75 degrees or so.
I'm actually not sure about that. The point is that they would both be visible.
Yes.
But they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because Earth is supposed to be causing the eclipse. So if you look it up online, they'll say this seems impossible, but it's because of the light is refracting, which is the same thing they say about these long distance things, where the light's somehow bending up, and therefore what you see in the sky is a mirage. It's not actually there.
Okay.
There are a few instances like that. Whales can communicate using sonar, and that's a direct line. It should be direct line of sight. It goes in a straight line. It's a wave. But they can communicate over very large distances. And if Earth is a sphere over thousands of miles, it should fly off.
Right. Same thing with radar too, right?
There are types of it's called horizontal wave propagation when you send waves out. And the excuse is, well, with whales, they say that there's a channel and that the sonar channel travels through this channel in the water and goes around the globe.
Yes.
And with regard to horizontal wave propagation, the excuse is that there's this. They invented the ionosphere, basically. And they said, well, the wave hits the ionosphere and then bounces back, so it hits you on another point on the globe. The problem is, Austin Whitsitt has looked into this. The ionosphere is only supposed to be able to reflect waves of a certain wavelength, but higher frequency waves would have to go through the ionosphere, and those higher frequency ones still reach people.
Yeah. So all forms of wave technology, although they're vibrating, but they vibrate within a certain metric.
Yeah, they're going straight, even though it's like a sinusoidal.
Yes. They're going straight. It can only work on a flat Earth model. None of it could work.
It wouldn't just bend around the curve.
Yeah.
Someone who's really far away.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
So some of those are pretty interesting.
Yeah, those are really fascinating.
Magnetic declination. I think this is a cool one.
We talked about this in the first one, but go through it again.
Worth doing again?
Yeah. So we have basically on a flat Earth model, you have the North Pole in the center, and then you have the South Pole is actually a circumference. It's not one single point. It's not one single pole. It'd be a southern circumference is a way to think of it. So in the globe model, the compass should always be able to reorient itself to due north. Because if you're on a globe, you might be bending around, but you know what's north. If you're on a flat Earth model, you constantly have to be recalibrating for what's north in the center.
Well, another way to say it is that compasses don't work using the globe model
Yes.
without manual adjustment.
Yes.
And it's because of the belief in the magnetic field that it comes from the core of Earth, which is supposed to be 4,000 miles down. But no one's ever been that far down. They've only been down under 8 miles.
Yeah.
So it's a guess that there's a core of Earth. The inner core is too hot to create a magnetic field, so they say. But because of what's known as the geodynamo effect, there's an outer core that generates the magnetic field of Earth. But no one's ever replicated a geodynamo effect. Because of this, we end up with a very strange thing where you have a geographic North Pole on the globe, a geographic place, and a geographic South Pole, but there's also a magnetic North and South, which are constantly moving around.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
Right.
And when you use a compass using the globe model, it's called magnetic declination. There's a website, magnetic-declination.com. You can see the amount of adjustment that's needed.
Yeah.
And this is the kicker as it relates to the shape of Earth, is if you go to Antarctica, magnetic-declination.com, it shows you crazy adjustments that you would need to make, sometimes over 170 degrees. Meaning, if you're going this way and your compass tells you basically turn around,
Yeah.
based on the compass reading,
Yeah.
you'd have to adjust your compass that much.
It's 10 degrees short of totally turning around.
And some are less dramatic. They're like 60 degrees, whatever it is. Why would that be the case? Well, let's just say the model that you described is accurate, which I don't think we can verify again, but where Earth is a topographical plane and maybe Antarctica is an ice wall around the side, around the circumference. If you were to compress that wall around the circumference into an island at the bottom of a ball, meaning if you suppress the flat map onto a spherical map, you would end up having to make crazy adjustments. Because think about it. These different points of Antarctica on the wall are different points of the circumference. You're compressing it into one island.
Yeah.
That would make sense why the adjustments would be so big on a globe.
And the other thing too is if you compressed the flat Earth onto a globe, in the southern hemisphere, you would have less time zones, not more time zones. Because in the southern, as you go from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, you increase to up to 39 time zones, right?
Yeah, in the 30s. I don't remember the exact number. It's 24 time zones at the equator. It's 19 in the northern hemisphere, and I think 32, I can't remember, 30 some. And that's another strange one. Because if you were to compress the flat map into a globe, you'd end up having to compress and expand time zones.
Yeah.
And
just kind of like to draw it out in my hand. So you have a globe and there's 19 time zones at the top. There's 24 time zones in the equator at the center. And then we should replicate the same model and have 19 time zones in the southern hemisphere. But for some reason, there's 30 plus time zones in the southern hemisphere.
Which makes sense if you were compressing a map. And people will tell you, well, this is just...
No, it makes sense if you were expanding a map. That makes sense on a flat Earth map.
No.
It doesn't make any sense on a globe.
Right.
Like, why would you have 19 at the top, 24 in the middle, and 30 plus on the bottom if it's the same shape, essentially?
I'm saying that if it were a flat map that you had to put into a globe, it makes sense why we had these weird discrepancies.
Yes.
Of not just, you could just do 24 time zones.
Yeah, I knew. Okay, yeah.
Why wouldn't we do it that way? Well, it might be because the map has been altered.
Yeah.
That's one idea. I don't know for sure, but it's kind of strange. Is it just political reasons that you have these weird time zones in weird places and the international dateline? And
I think we got into this on the first podcast, but I keep going back there, because it's like, there's like a certain point where you can it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it swims like a duck. And then we just continually analyzing the walking, the swimming, the quacking, and is it duck? It's it's like it's all this duck analysis, but like we never really come to like all this craziness. Like, what's your consensus, dude? Like, is there where's it? Why? Like, why are so many things? Why are almost all the pillars of our consciousness and the way we understand the world based on complete bullshit? and like orchestrated bullshit, it seems like.
Yeah. It gets into big metaphysical questions
Big
about what is this place?
Biblical, religious questions
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Like, are we in the little season of Satan and things that like two secular Jewish guys growing up in like, we're from Baltimore originally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Baltimore and New York. Like, we didn't grow up, our families didn't talk about this little season of Satan and this kind of shit like that.
But to me, there's a spiritual war. I don't understand it fully, where there are dark forces that seem to keep humanity in ignorance.
Boy, are we in the midst of it now too, politically, what we seem to be going on. It comes back to, not to have like whatever, and I told you so moment, but I have this triangle of consciousness, our understanding of the world, where the higher consciousness, Christ consciousness, God consciousness, whatever you want to call it, source consciousness is at the top of the triangle. And then we have the warring factions of the Luciferian consciousness and the satanic consciousness on one side. Luciferians want the preservation of the world, but total domination of the world. The satanic energy wants the destruction of the world. And God dang it, do we seem to be in the midst of this kind of bizarre triangular warfare. All I try to do is just hold the center and look at these two factions with some curiosity and so forth, and try to have some understanding, but try to stay towards the center path with it all. But Jesus, man.
So many inversions everywhere. It makes me, I think we're forced into these hypotheses, because how could it be that in every discipline,
how can it be
we're
in
told
every
the exact
discipline?
opposite, or we're told something that's totally unsubstantiated, and if you ask a question, you get called names? Isn't it pretty reasonable to say, well, I would love to see a 24-hour video of an Earth doing a full rotation, and I'd want to be able to zoom in and see buildings and people upright on the top and hanging sideways simultaneously on the side and upside down on the bottom, because that's the model.
Yeah.
Is that these things should be happening?
Yeah.
Isn't it so much to ask? I mean, NASA has a massive multi-billion-dollar budget, and many decades ago allegedly sent people to the moon through the Van Allen radiation belts and safely there and back, and you don't have the technology to show us a spinning globe? Same thing with viruses. You can't show me?
And we lost the technology to go back to the moon? I mean, there's so many anomalies, show us.
Another big one I should mention, if your audience is new to this, where I start my book, is dark matter and dark energy. I think this is critical.
Yeah.
Because all of physics is based on the idea that 96% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy. And only 4% is what we know of as baryonic matter. So the vast majority of the universe is stuff we don't understand. But dark matter in particular, it was conceived in 1933 through a series of observations of a cluster of galaxies. Fritz Zwicky was looking at the Coma cluster, and things were moving in a way that basically was not predicted by Einstein's gravity. There was missing mass. There needed to be much more mass there in order for him to observe these things. 99+% of the mass was missing.
Right.
So instead of saying we need to rethink Einstein and gravity and maybe motion works differently, certainly things move and an apple falls to the ground, but maybe there are other reasons beyond gravity that make it happen. Instead of rethinking all of that, they came up with dark matter, and they said, well, there must be matter there that we just don't understand.
Right.
Because obviously Einstein's right.
Right.
And so now here we are almost 100 years later, and dark matter has now been falsified by a mainstream physicist, Pavel Krupa, from the University of Bonn. He and his colleagues have been looking at this for over 2 decades, and they say with 5 sigma confidence, 99.999+% confidence, dark matter doesn't exist. So think about the house of cards. If dark matter doesn't exist, then we have to rethink relativity and Newton's gravity.
But also just think about how convenient it was that like there's 96% of the world of the universe that we can't understand and organize in this current model. So we're just going to create this new category called dark matter, and now we can explain the other 4%.
Yeah,
because anything that falls outside of the explainable 4%, it's in the dark matter folder.
Yeah.
I mean, how fucking convenient
it's convenient.
That?
We don't understand it, so we're just going to plug something in.
Right.
And that's what happens over and over again. But like the implications of that, in order for the entire cosmology to work, of a Big Bang and Earth revolving around the sun and all the shapes we see, it's based on very specific laws of physics and the mass of Earth being a certain thing. But if gravity isn't what we think, then we have to rethink all of cosmology. But on top of that, there is no unified theory of physics that can reconcile the two leading theories.
Yeah.
Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics, allegedly, they work well independently, but when you bring them together, Einstein's at the big scales of reality, quantum is supposed to be the small stuff.
Yeah.
They don't work together.
Yeah.
So we don't even understand. 96% is plugged in, and we have no unified theory of physics. don't tell me that we have it pretty well figured out, which is the argument I often hear, which is like, oh, we can explain things so well with the spinning globe model and the solar system with sun at the center, but that relies on physics that's broken and incompatible.
Yeah. Kind of going back to this this notion of like parasitic ideas, and that the energy that they become the viruses, like they are the things that spread. And then once it gets entrenched into, or once it gets hardwired into the human brain, and then once your livelihood is somewhat dependent upon that false model, it's really hard to crack that. But that's that, like, it is the genesis of that first mind virus, that toxic false idea. Was it random? Was it organized? It's like, are some global elites going somewhere to get these marching orders? Okay, well, these are like some bizarre Jabba the Hutt-like entries. This is now you're going to sell them this. Now this is the new stock that you got to sell, and you're going to tell them is the A++, and then we're going to take all their money and this and that. Or is it just like some just like somebody who assumed some power, who was probably a asshole and extremely violent, and assumed a position and owned some land, and then had children that they educated, that they fed and then these children had bad ideas, and then those bad ideas spread. Like, fuck, dude, I'm so mystified of like the origin points of this kind of thing.
Me too. I don't really get it. I think most people who are propagating these narratives are doing so innocently.
Yes.
They got a PhD, they were taught it in school, they didn't want to question it. And then other people listen to them.
And then they double down.
And there's hubris too. They don't want to admit they were wrong. But then there must be some people who know.
There must
be, especially once we get into cosmology, because it means NASA has to be deceptive.
Yes.
You can't get around that.
And there's tremendous evidence that they are, and they do. And I mean, they get $67 million a day of unaccounted for money. Who the fuck would want to tell the truth when you got that kind of gravy train going on?
And we look at the image of Earth. They're often composite satellite images that are put together. The blue marble image on the iPhone, that was photoshopped by a NASA artist. There's an interview with the NASA artist explaining how he photoshopped it and why he made it look a certain way, because he wanted it to look as he thought it would look as an astronaut from space.
Yeah.
So when you look into all these things that we maybe just assumed were true, there's always a little bit of deception or just misleading or not telling the full story. I mean, it's even possible that people at NASA are not fully aware of it, because often they're just collecting data. They don't know the origin of the data, and they're really smart and they think they're doing a really good job. Same thing with virologists in a lab, or anyone who works in a lab. They're basing their work on the data that they receive and the assumptions that they're told are true.
Yeah.
So you just need a few people. And I can't claim to understand how it works. I mean, it makes me think about religious texts. Things like the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the ancient Gnostic texts that were found, I believe in the early 1900s, they were hidden in jars. And these texts talk about basically a unified oneness or some greater being that then spawned off into other beings. And there was a rogue being that created the world that we're in, named Yaldabaoth, that wanted to keep the humans in a state of ignorance so that they would not be aware of their innate divinity, basically their connection to that source, so that our world is one realm within a more benevolent one, but that we live in an inherently deceptive one.
Makes sense. It really makes sense.
One of the quotes, I'm paraphrasing it, the rulers threw humanity into a state of confusion and toil so that they would be distracted with the things of the world and not have time to be focused on the Holy Spirit.
Wow. Well, another great conversation. It's so much to contemplate. I have children, and I'm massively like inspired and tormented and concerned about the world they're growing up in. In some sense, it's tremendous that these frauds, these fraudulent ideas, these parasitic ideas are being exposed. Because the only way we really can evolve is through their exposure, and the light of the divine has to hit them, and people then get to make like a truly informed choice. It's like my kids' generation, like they're they're the first generation where significant, researched, reasonable, thoughtful, compelling, contrary presentation to the bizarre world we're living in is at their fingertips. But the pressure to conform in a way has almost never been institutionally kind of never been greater. They keep locking schools up in these ways and constricting. And there's this whole new thing. We got to walk around with an identifying marker on you every day, a necklace with even at the middle school level, all school levels, there's this new Texas thing where you have to have a laminate. You have to always have your laminate, and but my generation, your generation, we were able to grow up with certain consistencies that could stabilize our consciousness, our awareness, our life, and those are getting shattered without the contemplation of the Holy Spirit, the undergirding that kind of needs to happen. So there's this free fall period that's kind of happening right now, which is pretty wild, man. Let's see how things are going to turn out.
I mean, technology gives an ability for mind control and brainwashing in a new way.
Yeah.
That the information is highly controlled, and with AI, it's biased. So people look to AI as if it's the source of truth, but it's really a source of propaganda because it's going to give consensus answers, and consensus isn't always correct.
But technology is also like this podcast. The podcast you do all the time. They're also out there. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. There's some deep wisdom, truths breaking through all the time.
Yeah, it's true.
Fascinating time we're living in.
Anything can be used for good or bad. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
So it's a matter, to me, it's always about the consciousness of the individuals using the technology.
Yeah. Yeah. You get asked this on every podcast, but I'll ask it again. Has the next, any ideas coming for the next one, or are you?
Right now, no book plans. Love talking about this stuff. Yeah. What I find is that for many people, what we talked about today is very new and mind-blowing. So there's always new audiences to reach, and I love talking about this stuff.
There's so many subjects too, like sovereign citizenship, the whole history of the formation of the United States, the true, just going into the whole admiralty law versus common law. I mean, there's so many subjects a guy like you could kind of jump into next.
People have asked me about this. I just have to get the hit where I'm really inspired to do it, and it hasn't happened yet.
No. There's a lot. It's pretty ripe field these days. So cool. All right, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. It was great. So thanks for listening, guys. That's a wrap.